Doc's missing, so I'm trying to go.
Uh-oh. Might be Jeremy.
Do now, well.
How long have you worked with the OIS?
I've been here since August of 1996.
There's been a lot of complaints lately about just the computer lab and how crowded it is, and that it's very hard to get things printed. What are you working? Is there anything that you're working on to get that fixed?
Are you thinking of both the Jonas Clark Computer Lab and the Library Computer Lab, or just one of them?
Mostly the Jonas Clark one, and then I have a couple of questions about the library also.
Sure. Perhaps a way to answer that question is to go back and look at that resource and see how it's been positioned over the last few years. If we go back to '96, which is sort of the time began for me, we had 60 computers, 30 Macs, 30 PCs, located in a couple of labs, 3 labs at the time. And at that time, there were 100 students with computers in the residence halls, connecting them up to the campus network. So the 60 computers in the general computer lab were considered to be a major resource for the university. Today, that number is more than 1,000 computers in the residence halls. And we've increased the number of computers in the general lab from 60 to 65 or so. There hasn't been a major push to add another 30 or another 60 because of all the increase that's going on in the residence halls. So it's making us ask the question, what is the place of these labs in the university? Some of that depends on the kind of assignments that the faculty give to you. So if there are more assignments that are given to students to use specialized software that we need to install on those computers, then that would demand that we add more computers. That's one result of it. If it's a matter of, if we follow this trend, that trend, by the way, went from 100 computers in '96, the '96-'97 academic year, to 200 the next year, to 500 last year, and over 1,000 this year. We might reach saturation next year. There are about 1,600 pillows in our residence facilities. So if we reach a point where virtually every student has a computer in their residence hall room, then how should we think about the general computing labs? And it's a question we don't have an answer for yet, because you get very philosophical about how you're going to think about those kind of things. One thing, just to add a little bit to this, is I mentioned earlier that we're talking about the demand being proportional to the kinds of software that the faculty are asking for. If we can supply access to that software without actually installing it on those computers, then that changes the dynamics as well. And we're looking at some software from Citrix Corporation to do just that. So we'd install the software on a server, the Citrix software on a server, and then install whatever application software the faculty member asked for on that same server. Then you could access that server from anywhere on the campus network, actually anywhere on the internet, use that software on that server, and have the screen portion, the GUI portion, displayed on your computer back in your room. So in terms of using it, you think that the software is actually executing on the computer on your desk, when it's really executing on a server somewhere else on the network. That's thin client application computing. And that's very popular in many areas in the country, and we're taking a look at that for Clark University.
In terms of the computer labs, I know from my own experience whenever I go in there, there's often a wait for a computer in the computer lab, and it can be very frustrating if you have to get a paper done.
Sure.
Especially because a lot of, well, as you said, a lot of people do have computers in their rooms, but not everyone has printers in their rooms.
Exactly.
And as there's 2 printer priority computers, 2 Macs and 2 PCs, I think, those are often in use by people that are trying to write papers because the computer lab is so full. So it's frustrating for both the people that are writing on the computer and that need to print. And I think it's especially frustrating knowing that next door there is another computer lab that's not available to people, where there's a room of empty computers.
Sure.
And while there are plenty of computers on campus in people's rooms, there are also plenty of people that don't have computers.
That's right.
And that number is higher than 60. So is there anything being done to make, for right now, possibly opening the computer lab next door so people can use that?
You're referring to Jonas Clark. And
right.
There are 3 computer facilities there, JC 101, 103, and 105. 103 and 105 are teaching computer labs. Those are rooms that are schedulable by the faculty in the same sense that any other classroom is schedulable. So if you're sitting in 101 and 103 may actually be empty because no professor has scheduled a class in there, it makes you say, gosh, I should be able to get in there and use those facilities. Again, we're wrestling with that. Those are supposed to be there for the faculty to use. Looking at it a little differently, though, we're trying to collect some statistics right now as to what students' preferences are for the computers. The consultant in JC 101 takes account every hour of how many computers are in use and how many computers are available, how many Macs are available, how many PCs are available. When people come into the room and all the PCs are in use, does that student sit down at a Macintosh, or do they go away and come back because they wanted to get to a PC? Or the same sort of story with the Macintosh. We're collecting those kinds of statistics, and what we intend to do is to adjust the relative numbers of computers to match the needs. Because if we looked at the outside world, so to speak, 95% of the world is using PCs. Should we have 95% of the computers being PCs and only 5% Macs? Probably not, but we ought to be sensitive to what that ratio is on our campus and reflect that. As far as the printers are concerned, each printer can print both from a Macintosh and a PC. Right now, the printers that we have are some of the fastest printers that are available to us. So I don't think it's a matter of the printer not being able to keep up with the printing job. It can get very busy, of course, when lots of people are printing things and the printer is turning out documents at 35 pages an hour or per minute or something like that. So there can be some congestion. And again, we're taking a look at that, particularly in the library. Because the library is a situation where it's an open lab. There's no consultant there. There's a telephone if a person needed to contact the help desk. But the printer in particular is just open and available. That tends to come into some abuse because of that. In JC 101, where the printer is very near the consultant, there's a little more supervision of it and there's a little less abuse there. But we're experimenting with some thoughts at this point for the library, wondering if we could somehow enclose the printer, perhaps have an attendant there, perhaps locate the printer somewhere else. The library has lots of desks in areas where it might be located, and maybe the jobs that get printed from the printer could be stored and made ready for someone to pick up, that sort of thing. And again, we don't know the answers. And it sounds as though we're doing a lot of studying and not doing a lot of action. These points that you're making are change semester by semester. 2 years ago, for example, about the time the final exams started, there was a great demand for computers in the general computing labs. And that was a big demand 2 years ago and virtually no demand at all last year, because a lot more people had computers in their residence halls. So the demand changes.
Do you think that perhaps more people are getting computers?
Wait, hold on 1 second actually, because the battery's about to run out. And I need to plug this in.
Should we do that one again?
No, just the next. We got that last one. I just need to.
Okay.
Get this. It'll take 2 seconds.
People are getting computers in their rooms is because they're frustrated with the computer lab itself and feel that they can't get their work done, and so they need to have a computer in their room.
There may be some element of that, but I think that if you look at some of the statistics, 39% of the homes in the United States have at least one computer now. I think people are coming here expecting that that's just going to be part of the resources that they use in their college career. I know if I were a student, I'd certainly want to come to campus with a computer, regardless of how many computer labs there were available, because I'd want to configure my computer the way I wanted it and understand that it was going to be in that condition all the time and available to me whenever I needed it.
But there's many students that, for whom college is a big expense and a computer is just impossible. And don't you feel that we owe it to them as a university to have good working computers at their fingertips at all times?
Mm-hmm. Yes, certainly. And we try to do that. We have one person, one full-time staff person, whose job it is to make sure those labs are available to students. He's supported by 2 student supervisors who assist him in that process, and then the student consultants in JC 101. The goal is to have every computer available 100% of the time with all the software that is needed for the students to use. And again, it gets down to what is the changing demand for those resources, both in terms of the number of computers and in the types of software that are available. We oftentimes find that faculty come to us saying, I'd like to have this particular piece of software installed on 30 computers by Monday, and they're saying this to us on Friday. Just from a logistics point of view, that's very difficult to achieve. Again, that's where this Citrix product comes into play. If we were to install one copy of that software on a server and then make it available to everybody, whether you were in one of the computer labs or in your residence hall, that changes the dynamics, changes the demand for the general computing labs. So there are just a lot of factors that come into play in any one of these things. But making the computers available is the bottom line of any of the activities that we're pursuing. While I'm on that subject, it takes a lot of effort to keep those computers operational, because any computer is very susceptible to let's say, being disrupted. I don't say that it's malicious, I don't say that it's accidental, it's just being disrupted. A person will expect a particular piece of software to be available, and we will have installed it, let's just say yesterday, and the student is using that computer today and finds out that not all the parts of the software are installed, so it doesn't work properly. So we go back and reinstall that software. Now, why were some parts of it not installed, or why were some parts of it deleted? We don't know, but we know that happens. It's a major problem. One thing that, and I don't mean to sound like a Microsoft salesperson here, but the newest version of Microsoft Office is, in a sense, a self-healing application. We can install that software on a server and then install it on all of the computers in the labs. And then if someone were to delete a particular part of that, and then another person come to try to use that software, when that second person tries to use the software says, well, I need a certain piece of myself that's not installed here, and it goes back over to the server automatically and reloads it. So instead of us running around to all the labs and reinstalling that software, the software reinstalls itself from a server. So again, that's an attempt to try to make it 100% available 100% of the time.
Many students have complained that the help desk in the computer lab is not very helpful, that they don't seem to know how to help. Many times they'll just simply say, I don't know what to do, you'll have to retype it, or you'll have to, you know, go to a different computer. Is there anything being done to get better training for these people, or more stringent application process, anything like that?
Okay. You mentioned help desk in the computer lab. We have a help desk here in OIS. We have consultants in the computer lab. The consultants are not expected to be help desk analysts. They're there to help people operate the computers, especially for a newcomer who says, gee, I don't know how to get started, need some orientation, some hands-on help. But if you go to that person with a pretty deep question, or maybe it might not seem so deep, but then you might expect that person to know it, it's sort of by chance that that person would really know how to answer your particular question, especially if it were a problem with a piece of software that we installed for some faculty member.
So do you think it might be valuable to have someone with more training in the computer lab, as there are 30 computers in there and there's many students in there at a time? Would it be more valuable to have someone that really knows what they're doing in there?
Sure. If we did that and had someone with a lot of training there, that person could deal with 30 people at a time in one facility. But there are 1,000 more people in the residence halls who may also have questions in the use of software. So again, it gets to a question of logistics. How do you serve the entire user population of, let's just say, 1,000 people in the residence facilities and another 60 or so in the general computing labs? we're trying to do that through the help desk. And the help desk was started a year ago last March, so March of '98. We staffed it with 2 students, full-time equivalent students, might have been 6 or 7 students to add up to 2 FTEs, for the 8:30 to 4:30 shift, Monday through Friday. And that's, again, student staff, not sent to school to become help desk analysts. We're drawing on whatever knowledge that person comes to the university with. So it's based on their home experience, their high school experience, and their experience on the job.
Do you think that our might need to hire more people just off the street with actual computer experience and a lot of computer knowledge to be holding those positions?
Well, what we're doing right now is augmenting those positions with full-time staff who are help desk analysts. As a matter of fact, the first of those 2 that we're hiring starts to work just after Thanksgiving. And this person will be on duty through midnight on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So here we'll have a person whose background is trained. She is trained as a help desk analyst. And so we're hoping that not only having the second shift, for all intents and purposes, but also having a person who is trained in just exactly the point you're making will be a more valuable resource to people who are calling the help desk. We're also recruiting a second person who will be on the first shift. So we'll cover the help desk with permanent staff from 8:30 in the morning till midnight, 8:30 till 4:30 Monday through Friday, and 4:30 till midnight on Monday through Thursday. And those 2 permanent staff will be augmented by student staff during the first shift of the day, 8:30 to 4:30. So we'll really have a total of 3 FTEs. We're using some of that student. Instead of having 3 on in the daytime, we're having 1 permanent and 1 student staff in the daytime, 2nd permanent staff at night.
The network has been down a lot this year, especially over the weekends when a lot of students need to do research and they can't get on the internet to do it. Why has that been, and is it going to be fixed soon?
Yeah. No, these are great questions you've got. The network, if we go back again 3 years to '96, although this is going to be terminology that you're probably not familiar with, but it serves just to try to illustrate where we were and where we are now. We had a 10 megabit shared Ethernet network. It was a network that literally you could go buy hubs, as we had. You could buy them in any of the computer stores, and many people build these kind of networks in their homes today. I don't mean we bought it at those stores. We bought them at other stores, and they were very robust pieces of equipment. But it was a rather simplistic network. It extended through the major buildings on campus, but it was still a rather simplistic network, and there was not a whole lot of network traffic. The network has changed, has grown in the last 3 years dramatically, because the university's use of information technology has changed dramatically. So you might ask which comes first here, the demand or the infrastructure, and actually we try to keep them in pace with each other. But now we have firewall to protect the university. We have something called a core switch, which again is jargon that doesn't necessarily mean very much, but it allows us to set up things called virtual private networks. We have increased the speed of the network from 10 megabits per second to 100 megabits per second. So we're ahead of the curve in terms of the capacity of the network and the sophistication of the network. And it's the sophistication of the network that has really been the thing that that has come into play, and you've seen some of the downside in the last month or so. It's a much more complex entity to run. Again, if we go back a few years when it was the VAX era, Digital Equipment Corporation and VAX computers, an organization like the Office of Information Systems would have contracts with Digital Equipment Corporation for support of the VAX cluster, the VAX computers. The network was just the wires, just connecting you to the VT220 terminals or the few people who had PCs or Macs. Today, things have shifted dramatically. The VAX cluster is no longer the center of attention. It's the servers that are attached to the network. We have probably 10 servers down in our equipment room now, serving up all kinds of things for various parts of the campus. But the network has really become in a sense, the living entity. Scott McNeely, who's the president of Sun Computing, said some time ago, the network is the system. And people never understood what he said when he said it, or didn't understand what he said when he said it, but it's becoming more and more true. The network is sort of the arteries and the veins, and the blood is flowing through that, and we attach various computers to that, whether they're servers or whether they're access to the internet or any other functionality. It is a much more complex entity now and requires much more sophisticated support. It's also, in some ways, much more fragile. And what we saw a few weeks ago was a series of events that illustrated some of that degree of frailness, so to speak. In one instance, and this covers, there's no one who escapes attention in this particular case. In one part of that, a faculty member had bought a piece of equipment at whatever store, connected it, and the equipment burned out. And it didn't just stop working, it started flooding the network with packets of information. And so the network just became saturated with these packets coming from a piece of equipment that was failing. So your packets and my packets couldn't get through. And we had to find that. Now, how do you find a needle in a haystack? We ultimately found it, but it took almost a week to find it. In another instance, staff had connected a piece of equipment that generated packets that were incompatible with other equipment of the same type that we have here in our main computer room. And those packets, in effect, were oil and water, couldn't mix, and ended up saturating the network with packets that weren't being answered, so to speak, weren't reaching any destination. Again, it was a needle in a haystack. That one was such a difficult problem, we had to have a network consulting company come in and help us try to find that problem, which we ultimately did. And in the third instance, a student's dad gave him a computer. The student put it in the residence hall, connected it up, didn't realize, nor did the dad realize, that there was a piece of software running on that computer that was, again, a negative impact on the network. And in that particular instance, made at least half of the residence halls inactive, the network that connects half of the residence halls. So here we're seeing things that people are connecting to the network that are causing damage to the network. I'm not saying OIS is blameless, we have our problems too, but this is a little like people experimenting with the phone system or experimenting with the electrical system, and that doesn't work very well. It doesn't work very well in the network either. So as a whole, the organization, Clark University, has to understand not only the value of this network and understand how much we need it to be functional all the time, but we need to use it in the spirit in which it's provided and not try to modify it or tinker with it in some way. Even with the best of intentions, nobody's trying to do things, at least as far as we know, no one's trying to do things in a malicious fashion. But my computer, for example, if its network interface card became defective, it might just stop working, but then again it might start sending out packets that are unrecognizable to any of the servers. So it can happen just sitting here, you and I talking, my network card could be dying. A previous place of employment I had was down in Tennessee, and it was in a medical center, a university's medical center. And one person's computer in one of the hospitals that was associated with the university, their network card went bad, and it flooded the whole university with their packets, shut down the university. This is not fun, and finding the problem is not easy. And that's just a measure of some of the difficulties that are associated with such a network today. It's a very complex job, and takes a lot of resources to manage it properly.
Many students who have Macs have complained that they haven't been able to get adequate help from the help desk. And I've heard that there's no Mac-trained worker at the help desk. And as students, we do have to pay a mandatory fee for internet connection in our room. And I think many students feel that because they had to pay that fee, they really deserve to have a Mac person there to help them.
Sure.
Is there anything being done to get someone who's Mac trained in there?
Yeah. Okay. There's a couple of resources here. We have student technicians that we hire we have 2 full-time equivalents worth of students. And in there we have two students who have Macintosh expertise, which is the same level we've had for some time. So they're available and go out on calls all the time. In the help desk, we're trying to find people to staff the help desk, but increasingly there are fewer and fewer people who have Macintosh background who are applying for the jobs. And I think that's really telling us that that's what the relative abundance of computers are on campus. There's an increasingly large number of PCs versus Macintoshes. So the people that we hire, a couple years ago they were more knowledgeable about Macintoshes, and now they're less knowledgeable, or there are fewer of them applying. But we certainly try to hire people with Macintosh expertise. And you're touching on something that I need to broaden that a little bit further. When you have a computer, you're using a computer, whether it's a Mac or a PC, and you experience trouble, some problem, the first place we suggest that you go is to call the help desk. And the help desk is going to try to answer your question. It may be, I don't know how to insert an image in a Microsoft Word document. Okay, so they can answer those kind of questions nicely. But they get to a point in some conversations where they say, well, I don't know whether there's a hardware problem. I don't know whether the person's basic system setup is somehow defective. We will escalate this call to our student technicians. And so the call gets escalated. Other calls get escalated to the network people, or to the systems people, or to the administrative services people, and so on. So they go in various directions depending on the nature of the call. But for those cases where we suspect, or the help desk person suspects, there might be a hardware problem, or it might be an operating system installation problem, something of that sort, it goes to our tech team, and they get dispatched to go out and look at it. Again, they're students, and they are not formally trained to respond. They do a triage on the person's computer and say, oh gosh, your computer needs to be rebuilt, or something needs to be reinstalled. And they do this applying their insight. And let's hope that it's correct. Many times it is. But what if the problem is too difficult for them to really diagnose correctly? Sometimes you say, well, we need to reinstall the operating system. Okay, that might actually solve the problem, but that's a fairly traumatic situation, because you've got to make sure you get backup copies of all your data and all that sort of stuff, and that you have all the software, the CDs for all the software that you installed on it. So it's a fairly traumatic event. And maybe if the person had more background, the tech team person had more background, maybe you wouldn't need to reinstall the whole operating system. Maybe only some repair of some aspect of it would work. So what we're trying to do today is we're talking to some companies, asking them if they can make such service available to the university that would sort of pick up at the upper end of what our technicians can do and take it to the next level. So we're talking to some people who represent Macintosh computers, we're talking to some people who represent PCs. So the break-fix world can be served not only by our students, certainly first the help desk, then the tech team, and then this new level that we're starting to take a look at. There's something very much analogous to that we've already done with what we call desktop enhancement. Here's a case where lots of people will buy a printer, let's just say, or realize their computer needs more memory or some upgrade, but the computer is basically working to begin with. They've called us, talked to the help desk, call goes to the tech team person goes out there and installs it. But there are more calls than the tech team can handle in terms of those enhancements, in addition to all the break-fix things that they've been trying to do. So we've said to ourselves, why don't we break that in half? We'll do the break-fix, as we still do internally, although now we're trying to look at some companies to help with that. But the enhancement services are something that someone from outside Clark University can actually do. And if they're trained in the Macintosh operating system or the NT operating system, they could probably do it better than our students could do it. So that's what led to the agreement that we have with Boise Technologies. So if you're sitting in your room and 800 number and a credit card, they'll come and install, they'll sell you a printer and come and install the printer for you. So that allows you low pricing, expert service in a timely fashion. And our tech team can handle those triage things. The number of calls, the intensity of everything has increased so dramatically in the last 3 years, you wouldn't recognize where we were 3 years ago. And we still have the same number of tech team people. We've introduced the help desk in this period of time, and we've added these things like the Boise Technologies Agreement to handle some of this increased load. 2 years ago, we sold network interface cards, or up to a year and a half ago, we sold network interface cards. And in September of '98, we had 50 network cards to install for students in September. And don't forget, it's our student techs who are installing them. They didn't get all those cards installed until November. So what would you rather do? Sit here and wait for 2 months for this tech team person to reach you, or call Boise and say, I need a network interface card, here's my credit card number, please come and install it, whatever you agree with, whatever time and date to install it. So we can't keep up with the increased demand.
So are students then paying Boise to do this?
Yep.
I think that some students may have problems with that because of the fee that they're paying originally to the college for internet access. Is there a way to go about that where students may not have to pay? Or is it, and what it really sounds like is that OIS is fairly understaffed, and perhaps the college needs to give more money to OIS and so they can expand what they have here, and so to get people out there into their rooms and doing this, which sounds like it would be cheaper than having to go buy more computers to facilitate everyone that needs a computer on campus.
I won't argue with you that we're understaffed. But we are, when just thinking the network interface card situation for a minute, the students would come with computers without network interface cards, not really understanding what a network interface card is, because a lot of people have computers at home. They might have a modem and they dial an internet service provider, but what the heck is a network interface card? They don't have network at home, so why should we expect them to understand what it is? So they come here with those computers, they learn that you need a network interface card to attach to the network, and we were selling them, and then saying, go ahead and install it yourself. You can get your buddy to install it, anything like that. We can install it, but we've only got 2 FTEs worth of technicians. They're students like you. We're not even going to have their work schedule until 2 weeks into the semester. So automatically it's mid-September before the first person could get served. And it's a couple hours to install it and to make sure everything is working. So you do that out and trying to schedule time when somebody's available in their room and all that sort of stuff. And that's what took to November. So then we sent messages to the students, especially the incoming class, and say, here are the things that you ought to have on your computer when you come here. When you buy a computer, and many people, of course, buy a computer before they come to campus, we say, buy a computer with a network interface card in it. In essence, they haven't been coming with a computer that's ready to plug in. The fee that you're paying pays for that little orange jack in the wall and all the rest of the network for you to use, but it doesn't, if you don't have the right equipment to plug into that, then you need to go supply that. So the fee is for what's beyond the wall, so to speak. The fee is not for your network card. And this year, there were many fewer people thinking that we had 500 computers last year, and there are approximately 1,000 this year. Boise had installed about 40 network cards. And when there were 500 people with computers on campus, we installed 50. So we know the message got out there, and that lots of students came with network interface cards in their computers. So that's working. And it's a matter of distributing the workload here. If you can buy a computer and buy it at Staples and say to Staples, please install this network interface card, great. Then you come to campus, all you have to do is plug it in.
Okay. I think that's pretty much.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Another service that OIS makes available to the campus is something called a listserv. Many people are familiar with subscribing to lists and getting mail that a certain company wants to send out or a certain organization wants to send out. And we have that available here now on campus, and it's available to faculty and staff and students, particularly the student organizations. And in such an organization, you may want to send messages or mail messages to a number of subscribers and have the type of list that you could call a discussion list, where each of the subscribers can respond to some posting by some other subscriber on that list, and you can end up with very nice threaded discussion lists. That type of activity could lend itself very well to classroom activities where certain questions are posed to the students answer them, and other students respond to their answers, for example. Another type of list is just an announcement list, and that might be something where perhaps some student organization may wish to say to other students, a certain group is going to be performing in Atwood Hall this weekend, for example. So this is an announcement, and it doesn't really require that a student respond to that announcement. So there are general discussion lists, there are modified or managed discussion lists, and there are announcement lists. And if you're interested in those kinds of things, you should get in touch with OIS, and we can set you up as a list owner and representing one or another of the various student organizations.
Okay. And so for that, is that like a simple process too? Because I know that setting up a listserv like outside of campus is kind of difficult.
Yeah, it's a piece of cake.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize I had that. Okay, is that
That's
it? Okay, cool.